Hi, my name is Cathy Langford. I was a resident of Lower Manhattan on 9/11.
My name's Bob Porch, and I was a volunteer construction worker trying to rescue team down there.
Hi, my name is Peter Bitwinski. I am a former worker for Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, working in One World Trade Center, 69th floor.
Okay, so it's crazy to look at those towers right there. One of the 5 categories of our volunteers, I was a resident. I worked and lived in Lower Manhattan. And my backstory is, I think I kind of describe it the best way is our story was a great little snapshot of the American dream, right? I wasn't really from New York. My husband was from Australia. I was from Virginia. And we had moved to Manhattan a couple years before because we'd gotten this great job offer in New York. And we both worked in the financial district downtown. And most people that we knew are living on the Upper East Side, Upper West Side, but we thought, well, why would we do that? We'd have this big commute on the subway and our jobs are downtown. So we found this little studio apartment and we've been there for about 3 years. And if you don't know what a studio apartment is, it's one room, right? You have your kitchen and then, your bedroom is your sort of living area. So after 3 years of, kind of saving money, we thought, we're moving to the big time. We're going to move a couple blocks over, 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment. And we really deliberated over it. Like, should we move to Hoboken or should we, spend all this money on rent? But we ended up signing a lease in this beautiful apartment building. It was 75 West Street, so directly south of the World Trade Center. Right next to my office, I worked at Deutsche Bank, and Guy worked at Deloitte in the World Financial Center. So we were so proud of this apartment. It had 2 bedrooms and it had all these windows. We went from having 1 window in the studio apartment to 17 windows because our apartment kind of like the building was a U shape. So our apartment was like 3 sides had windows on it. And we were so tickled or just proud of the fact that when we looked out, you saw the World Trade Center. And the towers were so big and we were so close that when you looked up, you couldn't even see the top of the towers. You literally had to stick your head out the window and look up to see it. And it was great because when we'd have friends come visit, from Virginia, Australia, wherever, we would always go to the World Trade Center. There was a great bar called Greatest Bar on Earth. And, you just got in the express elevator and went up and, there was no charge or cover charge or anything like that. So we always loved showing off that landmark to everybody. But fast forward to 9/11, I remember being in the apartment and I was standing in the kitchen holding a piece of whole wheat toast, I remember, and kind of waiting for the butter to melt. And standing there, we felt this huge explosion. And I thought, a bomb must have gone off, in our building because the whole building shook. And I called out to my husband and I said, bomb's gone off. And we looked outside and, immediately it wasn't our building. Took some pictures. We could see one of the towers was on fire and, smoke coming out of it was, this is pretty early, so not that bad. But we put the TV on, we took some pictures and early reports were like, oh, it was a small plane. But, you just knew it was such a beautiful day and so clear that we thought, no, this was deliberate. Like somebody, if they were in distress on a plane, they would have just ditched it or, into the river or something. That was like right in the middle of the building. So standing there in the apartment in disbelief, 15 minutes go by and we hear the sound of jet engines way too loud, way too close. And then we hear the next explosion and now both towers are on fire. And that's a picture from our apartment of both towers burning. So I think my mind and my body went eerily still. Guy yelled out to me, he said, get dressed, we're getting out of here. And I was still in my pajamas. And I forgot to tell you, in between the first tower and second tower being hit, I called my mom and she didn't pick up. So I left a message on her answering machine and I said, Mom, I said, World Trade Center is on fire. I said, there are bodies, there are people falling out. And I said, I think I'm in labor. We hadn't gone to work that day because I was 9 months pregnant with my first child. And it feels like it was that day when I tell this story again. So I remember brushing my teeth, getting ready to get out of there, not knowing what we were going to do. But I remember the weight of the tears just coming down my face because even in the bathroom, we had a window and you could just see things falling. So we got down to the lobby, and the guy said, "Okay, we're gonna leave." And I remember thinking, well, I can't leave, right? Like, if something's gonna hit us on the head, like there was glass and metal flying through the air, and I thought, we're safer here. Like we can't get out of the building. And then there were two ways out. So we stayed for a while, and people were kind of congregating there in the lobby. And then all of a sudden, I guess we felt what we thought was like it sounded like a huge avalanche. I thought our building had been hit with something, and I thought our building was just collapsing on us. We didn't know that the tower had fallen. I just thought our building was coming down. And I remember my husband had kind of put his arms over me, and as if to kind of protect me. And I remember I said, "I love you, and I'm sorry." I thought this was it. But the lights went off, and then people started running in the building, covered in this like white ash. And again, we still didn't know what had happened. We know that the tower had fallen, and I'm not even sure people running in knew what was going on. But kind of pieced together a couple things. I think we thought maybe the top of the tower had come off. We didn't think the whole thing came down. And then we stayed there for a while, and someone came in and said, "Hey, listen, everybody has to leave. We don't know if this building's stable, like get out of here." So we left on the side of the building that was on the West Side Highway, that normally is a busy highway. It was eerily quiet. You could hear a couple sirens, and that was it. And by the time we sort of started walking out, somebody said, "Don't look back, just run south, run south." And then again, the same sound, the second tower is collapsing, and we just started running down the highway. So we ended up in someone else's apartment building. People were sort of taking shelter there, and we put the TV on so we could see what had happened. And I remember seeing the towers come down thinking, oh my gosh, but then they said the Pentagon was hit. And I thought, oh my God, like my family's from Virginia, like the Pentagon, like that's the center of our defense. And I thought, they're really coming for us now. So eventually an ambulance came, and they said, "We're here for the pregnant lady." And I raised my hand. I said, "That's me." They put us in an ambulance. We went to Beth Israel, where they did their check over, and they said, "Mrs. Langford, the baby looks good. The baby's not in distress. You're welcome to stay here and have the baby, or you can go to Staten Island or New Jersey. You can leave because they're evacuating Lower Manhattan." And I remember thinking, I'm not having this baby in New Jersey. I'm gonna get to my hospital. So we left Beth Israel, and we walked up to, I think it was 34th Street, NYU Tisch. We found our doctors that we had planned to deliver with. And at 3 a.m. on September 12th, we delivered a healthy baby girl that we named Grace. I don't know if I have any pictures, but Grace is now almost 20. It's gone by like that, but she's really a special spirit. We went back to our apartment to, collect some things later. That's the view afterwards. But we never lived again in Manhattan. We moved in with my parents for a couple months while we had Grace, and then we ended up relocating. We bought a place in Hoboken, so raised her for a couple of years there. That's my story. So.
Thank you, Cathy. Bob?
Hi, everyone. My name's Bob Porch, and I was a volunteer down at Ground Zero the week of 9/11. I started out in the trades when I was a young man. I spent about 25 years in the trades. One of the skills that I acquired was being a welder. I could weld steel, cut steel with oxyacetylene torch. And I remember the day of 9/11. I saw the second plane hit on TV. And then I saw the collapse of the two buildings. And later on that afternoon, another 47-story building collapsed #7 World Trade Center. And when I looked at that pile of 267 stories worth of steel, I knew that the one critical skill that they were going to need was burners, guys that could just cut up the steel into pieces that cranes could lift. And I was ready to go immediately, but Manhattan was locked down right after the attacks. There was no way to get into the city. You could leave, but they shut down all the bridges, the tunnels. Matter of fact, I was told the largest waterborne evacuation in history was taking 500,000 people off of lower Manhattan that day. So there weren't any boats bringing people there. You know, they were all taking people away. And Thursday, I heard on the TV that they were reopening train service into Manhattan. So I started getting, everything might need together. As soon as I knew the train service was in fact running, I took 4 trains to get up to New York City. I live in southern New Jersey. I'm right outside of Philadelphia. So I had to take a train to Philadelphia, one from Philadelphia to Trenton, Trenton to New York, and from there it was walk. There was nothing operating up there. The Thursday evening they had called for light rain, and I had stopped at one of the home supply stores, and I tried to pick up some rain gear. And they had cleared the shelves and put everything on trucks and it's already sent it to ground zero. So I bought one of these little clear 99-cent ponchos. I wasn't working currently in the trades, but I had some of my old Union shirts, and like the one that I'm wearing now says Tribute Museum, 9/11 Tribute Museum. Well, the one I wore that night said Local 27. It could have been butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers for all anybody knew. But when they asked me for ID at the barricades, I just pointed to Local 27 and said, I burn iron. And they said, go ahead, guy. But it wasn't light rain. It was a monsoon-like rain, and there was heavy lightning. So there was one time that everybody was pulled back because of electricity. Lightning bolt hit a steel girder and you're anywhere close to it, you're going to get fried. So especially with all the rain, because that just is more conductivity. So I got to the last barricade, and a young police officer there, he said, you can pass if you want, but there's a door up there that's open. If you go up there, you can get some decent rain gear and a cup of coffee. I had just walked 2 miles through Manhattan in the pouring rain, and a cup of coffee sounded good. So when I went in there, I found out that it was the elite NYPD units, the emergency service police. And they had 3 groups, construction workers that were supporting them. And they also had elite units from Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Indianapolis was there. And I got some good rain gear, and I got some coffee, and one of the construction workers came over to me and he asked me, says, do you have a Sharpie? And I said, yeah. He says, you might want to write your social security number somewhere on your body, like maybe your chest, So just a suggestion, in case something bad happens. I didn't like the sound of that. Then he says, you might want to write it on your arms and your legs too. And that, like, hey, I know, like, that debris pile out there is loose and something could slide, I could, maybe smash a foot or something. I just, so a little while later, I asked another construction worker, I said, just what's the plan? What's going on? And he said, well, these guys are going to be searching the uncollapsed portions of the underground. And we're supposed to follow them, keep them in sight, but not get too close. And if something bad happens, again, that bad happens, I didn't like the sound of that. He says, we're supposed to come quick and start digging. Well, after we were waiting for this, heavy rain to stop, and they were moving out in shifts, and I was waiting for my team to get called out. And I overheard one of the police officials, like white shirt boss guys, talking to my team leader and asked him if he knew any engineers. And said, I know some, but I'm not friends with any. Why do we need engineers? And he says, well, we believe that there's two 50-story towers in imminent danger of collapse. And one of them was the building Cathy worked in, the Deutsche Bank building. It was eventually, torn down, demolished. And the other was number 1 Liberty, which they were able to repair. The interesting thing is, following summer, a study committee that had been looking at number 1 Liberty come up with why it didn't fall down. They said there was no scientific explanation why it stood, that it should have collapsed. But it was on the perimeter where we were going to be underneath them, searching. I was like, oh man, Bob, what you got yourself into? That was Friday that I was there. It was also the day the president showed up. So they said that anybody who, to the police officer, this is a Secret Service police officer, anybody you don't recognize from yesterday, you haven't seen before, you check their ID and make sure, they belong down here. So at the time, I had gotten out of the trades, going back to college as a non-traditional student, and was on the staff teaching at university. So I'm with this team of construction workers, and this cop sees me and he says, "You got ID, pal?" And I'm trying to think, like, hell, even bank robbers, felons have a driver's license. So I'm trying to, I need to convince him I'm a good guy. So I whip out my university faculty ID card and hand it to him. It's photo ID. And he's looking at me, hard hat, work boots. I just look like a typical hard hat, And he's saying, so what is it, pal? Are you a hard hat or a professor? So I laughed and I said, look, I spent 25 years in the trades and I went to school at night and blah, blah, blah. And, I said, now I happen to be on staff of a university. He said, so what do you teach? And I told a little fib. I said, sculpture. I use a cutting torch all the time, sculpting. And actually I was teaching technology, but, I had these other construction workers, their heads snapped. I mean, they looked at me like, what are you doing with us? They didn't say it, but that's the look on their face. So I had to come up with something that would satisfy everybody. Well, meanwhile, getting hung up with this guy, my team kept pushing on to go around the site to get into the underground entrances off Broadway. And everybody, there's like hundreds and hundreds of people down there, and everybody's either got yellow or orange rain gear on. So I couldn't tell my team from anybody. So I figured I'm going to take a shortcut and try and head them off and be on Broadway when they get up there. And I thought I could maneuver between the collapsed customs building and Tower 7, that 47-story one that collapsed. And I started making my way through there, and there was this green gas, and it was blowing the other way. So I'm picking my way across this debris, trying to get up to Broadway, and the wind shifted. And I had a great uncle that fought in the Canadian Corps in the First World War, and they were the first ones that had poison gas used on them. And when that wind shifted, I got poison gas. I don't know for sure what it was. I found out later that there were a number of ammunition bunkers that had riot control gases, both in 7 World Trade and in the Customs House. The DEA Customs, a number of alphabet organizations had munitions bunkers. And that stuff was all burning. And there was also a swimming pool on the Marriott. And they had, massive, stockpile of chlorine. Well, whatever it was a green gas that just, oh, it was terrible the way it just burned my airways. And because of the rain, I couldn't distinguish between steam and smoke very well. And as I'm making my way across these girders, I end up burning both my feet. There was a steel girder that was still really hot that was covered in this gray snow. So I tried to catch up with these guys and never was able to find them. So then I'm getting challenged every time I hit a barricade. Got an ID. I found out later, because I didn't know, because I was from out of state, that I was supposed to get a white paper from the police up at Javits and take that and get a red badge. And so I started proceeding to try and get the proper ID so I could stay there and work. And it was just crazy. But I ended up with severe breathing problems, started right afterwards. Now I'm on oxygen. This is the worst toxic waste site in the history of New York down there. I'm on 31 medications. Saw a specialist last week that gave me good news and bad news. This is most likely cancer, but it's a slow growing one, and in your condition, you'll die with it, not of it. My thyroid got knocked out. I have to take these little white pills in order to maintain my body temperature. My lungs are shot, my sinuses. Just the effects of being down there for a few days was the one thing that I would do different. I would still go back. It was an amazing experience. But the one thing I would do different would be to take my own respirator and a box of chemical cartridges. Oh, we had paper dust masks, and that was no help. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Bob, you're a true inspiration. My name is Peter Bitwinski. My connection to the World Trade Center is as a worker, an evacuee, and a survivor. My story starts with being hired by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey back in 69th floor of Tower 1. Really, it was unexpected. I was happy to have gotten a job, and it was a great start to my permanent working career. The first 15 years were wonderful working at a World Trade Center. I live in New Jersey, took the subway train over. You know, for a young kid working in the greatest city in the world, in the most famous building in the world, it was, you know, a true privilege. The first bad thing that happened, obviously, was the bombing in 1993. I was in the building at the time, fortunately survived and was offered the opportunity to return, and I did for two reasons. I had a job that I struggled to get and I didn't want to lose. And secondly, I didn't think another attack would happen. But 8 good years followed. New York, World Trade Center, downtown Manhattan, all bounced back. And everything was good until the morning of September 11th of 2001. I'm typically a worker who came to work early, so I was at my desk at 8:15 in the morning, and a half hour later was when the plane hit. It hit at about 91, so on my floor there was no smoke, no fire, no things falling off the wall. What I experienced is what I heard and what I felt. It threw me onto my desk, and really the next 1 to 2 minutes were the longest in my life. I got up out of my desk chair and I heard the sound of crunching steel, of the building moving back and forth. When I got up onto the floor was rolling, literally beneath my feet. And you know, the plane had hit from behind me, so I didn't even know it was a plane. Really, those 1 to 2 minutes were the longest in my life. I remember whispering to myself, is this where it all ends for me? Is this where I die? But fortunately, I didn't. The building righted itself, and it was time to evacuate. We were trained. We knew to go to the staircase and not the elevator. For me, I have a friend who's paralyzed. His name is John, and John was my coworker buddy for over 15 years. And I knew John would need help. I went off to get his evacuee chair, a lightweight chair that could go down a staircase. And when I came back, 10 of my buddies hung around to help. It was absolutely vital and so appreciated. We got John into the evac chair. We came up with a quick plan, 2 guys at the bottom of the chair, 2 at the top. And we began our descent down the staircase. We rotated every 5 floors, bottom to top off. And we're moving well. The plane hit so early in the morning that there weren't as many people at work. So down the staircase was pretty good. We stayed to the right because we were slower than the people walking beside us. And really it was okay. It began to get a lot hotter though in the staircase, and we knew there were other staircases. So we moved at the 44th floor to a different staircase, and it was a good move because the other staircase was a lot cooler and enabling us to get down a little easier. When we reached the floors of the 30s, we began to encounter people moving the opposite way. As we were moving down on the right, they were moving up and walking up on the left. Who were these people? They were firefighters and buildings operations people there to guide them. True heroes. One of my visuals is them slumped against, some of them against the side of the staircase, breathing real heavy, trying to catch their breath so they could continue to move on up to either rescue people or help put out the fire. I remember hearing accounts in the National Museum that some of them reached the 78th floor, which to me is amazing, given that they were carrying between 80 and 100 pounds on their back. I had gained a much greater appreciation for firefighters after that. We moved well in the staircase. When we got into the 21st floor, we were asked to leave the staircase and go onto the floor. It was a police command center floor. We were told that they were moving equipment up in the staircase and we would be blocking their way. So would go onto the floor for a short time until they cleared, and then we would be back in the staircase. We were on that floor just a short time when the building began to vibrate and rumble again. I wasn't near a window and I didn't see it, but what that was the collapse of the South Tower coming down. Shortly after that, we re-entered the staircase to go the rest of the way down. I remember us reaching the 10th floor when everything stopped, and there was some panic that ensued. Some of the building's ops people had radios, and some of my buddies had heard that Tower 2 was down. I personally didn't, but they began to panic a little and shout down that we got to get moving. Shortly after that, we did, and we continued to the lowest floors of the building. I remember there being a lot more water and obstacles that we had to kind of navigate around, but we did. And finally, we reached the lobby of the building. It was about 10:15 in the morning, about an hour and a half after the plane had hit. When we got to the street, the one thing I noticed and I remember is that there was nobody around. It was totally different than 1993 when everybody was around, fire trucks, police officers, people running around. There was nobody around. We got to our first corner moving north. We saw our first person. He said he got to hustle northward. Again, I wasn't aware the other tower was down. As we were moving north, we would glance back at our tower. There was a lot of smoke and haze in the sky and what we thought was debris coming down. We walked further on West Street with John and we look again, we realized it wasn't debris coming down. It was people jumping from the highest floors of the tower. And for all of us, it hurt. Us and them and everyone just came to work that day, and now people were dying and jumping from the tower. And it was one of the real sad moments I reflect upon at that time. We went a little further and the ground started to kind of shake, almost felt like an earthquake. And we look up and a giant cloud is approaching us, and not knowing what it was or what was in it, we grabbed John, we ducked into the Stuyvesant School across West Street and closed the door behind us. There was a little window in the door, and I remember looking out of the window and it just got pitch dark like nighttime. And all that rumbling and darkness was the collapse of the North Tower, the tower that we had all worked in for over 20 years. So within 2 hours, a lot of destruction, 2 towers down, but most notably 2,753 people who died. Something Cathy mentioned and Bob mentioned resonated with me. Cathy mentioned about going to Beth Israel Hospital, and I myself also went to Beth Israel Hospital with John. John needed to be checked out as a paralyzed individual, and so I took the ambulance ride with him, and we got to the hospital. I think it was the one on 16th Street, Beth Israel North, I guess it is. I'm not sure if that was the same one as you, Cathy, but I remember they were set up for triage, and unfortunately the way the towers came down, there was little or no triage because you either survived or you didn't, basically. What Bob said about Manhattan locking down was absolutely true, in that John and I stayed at the hospital a very long, kind of drawn out day of just waiting. John needed an ambulance back to Queens, and he had lost everything, his van, his wheelchair, and he needed that ambulance ride back to Queens. I was going to wait it out with him to eventually get back to New Jersey, and neither one of us could get back that day because Manhattan locked down, not only for incoming vehicles, but at 7 p.m. it also locked down for exiting vehicles. So John and I spent the night in the hospital. Fortunately, the following day, John got an ambulance ride back to Queens, his home, and I was able to make my way back to New Jersey. And that is my story of good fortune, luck, and God blessing me. I talk to you in thanks, and glad to share my story.
What an amazing friend and coworker you were to take care of your friend like that.
Thank you, Cathy. I mean, John was one of us. He was our buddy. I mean, when you sit in an adjoining workstation with another person, it doesn't matter who they are. It's like you get to know that person so well. They're like a family member. And, John wasn't a person we were going to abandon. Still to today, I talk to him here and there, and, it's life.
Something you said totally resonated with me about Beth Israel. When I tell a longer version of my story, I remember the ambulance doors opened up and there was this sea of like white coats of people, like you said, ready to help. And I almost felt like I could walk, I walked out and I almost felt like it was a disappointment, like they were waiting to help people and there was nobody to help. I mean, there were some burn victims, but yeah, it was Yeah, that was tough.
They were expecting a lot of triage. They called all the doctors and nurses and everybody was there. And, as it turned out, I mean, we went there to get John checked out. I was okay, but, I think just the way the buildings came down was, really so unexpected by, I think, almost everybody.
Yeah, and something else that you said too, about, I think I like the way you described it when you saw people falling out of the building, because I did too. Just that it hurt. And listening to your story about the temperature changing as you were walking down, and even listening to, I think, Bob's story about burning his feet, that days later the steel was so hot. And one really sad thing that I reflect on was, we know some of those people were jumping. They didn't fall because they had to make a choice because it was so hot and miserable. And holding hands, like that's the reality. It's the hard part to accept. We can watch the towers falling on TV, but if you really zoom in and you listen to the stories, like you said, it hurts to think about what people were going through in those upper floors.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, survival had all to do about where you were. If you were below the impact line like we were, you had a staircase to go to. If you were above the impact line, your staircase was either a big fire or a beam blocking it. So those people went back to their office. They broke through the window. They were waving closing. They were desperate. The roof was locked. They were desperate to get, rescued, and it just couldn't happen. And I just, it's why I think terrorism is so terrible. Some of them were standing on that ledge for almost an hour, and fire raging behind them. You literally had to choose how to die. Just think of it, a human being having to choose, whether to get burned, whether to jump to their death, or ultimately the tower came down. It's no way any person should have to live and die. And it's, again, one of the truly sad memories I have of that day.
Another thing, go ahead.
Not being there, but watching it on a big screen TV with the TV cameras zooming in on the buildings, I could clearly see individuals, that were jumping, and it was not a few. They estimate maybe it was like 200. And I know the temperatures up there were between 1200 and 1500 degrees Fahrenheit on those fire floors. And the heat, that kind of intense heat, your choice is, just vaporize or jump 1,000 feet and get, you're not going to feel any pain when you hit the ground jumping from 1,000 feet. But, the choice, like you say, nobody should have to make that choice. And to do that, that just, kind of lets you know the horrendous conditions. But, those beams, they were red hot on the fire floors. And they stayed hot. And even, the following weeks when the graftlers would grab a hold of a big, pile of cable and wire and steel, as soon as the oxygen hit this hot steel, it would just burst into flames. They had to have firemen standing right there with fire hoses to put out the flames as it would just, it burned for months. There was 20,000 gallons of diesel fuel where they had the emergency management bunker in Building 7. And each of those airplanes was carrying 10,000 gallons of jet fuel. So you got 40,000 gallons of this, highly explosive, highly flammable, burning everything that was in those buildings.
All right. Another thing that you said, Bob, talking about the air quality, and I know you're having so many issues now, but when we went back like a couple weeks later just to grab like wallets and passports, you couldn't live in our apartment. There was no power, it was in ground zero, but they were initially saying the air is fine. And you literally just had to shake your head to be like, do you think we're stupid? Like, it is not fine. And I don't even just, now they'll say, okay, it was toxic, but of course it was toxic. Yeah. And I remember we argued with our insurance company because the windows had been open and all that ash was all over. And they said, oh, well, we'll deep clean your carpets and your couch. And we said, do you have kids? Do you want them to come over and play on the couch that you just vacuumed off? We know that's toxic material that's coated the entire place. And, a deep cleaning is not going to get rid of it. Just interesting little.
Well, the one thing that I realized afterwards, this was an act of war. We were at war.
Yeah.
And in war, you expect a certain number of casualties and certain percentages of people are expendable. The rescue workers down there, we were all expendable. Wall Street was just a few blocks away. If they'd have said that this is the worst toxic waste site in history in New York, the air, the dust, everything is poison, nobody would have gone back to work. Wall Street was the financial, downtown was the financial capital of the world. It had to reopen.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
As we are approaching very rapidly, in fact, the 20th anniversary this September, are there any, reflections that you have, about your personal journey over the last 20 years or, just how the world's changed, over the last 20 years?
I remember the unity and the selflessness that was down there, like John and his friends helping the guy with a wheelchair. If there was something that needed to be done, somebody that needed help, people just did it. There wasn't a panic in the evacuation of the buildings. It was orderly. The bravery of the firefighters going up there. And Peter was right. They did get as high as the 78th floor in the South Tower, and they were putting water on fire, trying to clear a path through the fire floors for the people trapped above. Battalion Chief Oriole Palmer and Ladder 15, they were up there fighting that fire. And if they'd had a little longer, it might have been a really big miracle, but it just wasn't to be. And it breaks my heart to see how divided the country is getting now, as opposed to the unity we had back in those days. It was just everybody wanted to pitch in, do something. There were college kids when the university shut down, all around the barricades, begging, please let us help, let us help. And, today it's just, we're so polarized. Some things
Yeah,
you just can't change.
I feel like, the 20 years have gone by really quickly. That I try to think about. Someone said to me once, oh, aren't you glad Grace was born on the 12th and not the 11th? I don't think it actually mattered, but I do like, if I think about September 11th as being our worst day, I would say as a country, September 12th would have been our best. So many people coming out to help, so many people flying the flag, so many people, feeling and praying for New York and the people in the Pentagon, and really caring about, what had happened to those people. And also feeling that, when you tell a story, when I tell my story, it certainly happened to me and my neighbors, but I feel like it happened to America. Like this was an attack on America. So as Americans, it's important to know and remember what they did. What sometimes I think I do love the memorial. I love reflecting absence. I love seeing all the names, and the new tower is spectacular. But it's so fancy now, like the Oculus or the white, pass station. It's so pretty. I just get concerned that if you don't watch the video, you would never believe that could have happened. that actually did happen, that those planes flew in there and then the buildings collapsed. Like it's almost, you look back and you think it's like you're watching a movie, that actually happened in New York City. It's crazy.
I echo some of the memories that Bob and Cathy had about the aftermath of the September 11th attacks and how the US came together, and New York City, and the kindnesses that people were offering to strangers and flying the flag, and all the positivity that you saw that eventually dwindled. But you know, it was a wonderful memory. You know, for me, you know, the two hallmarks of 20 years later is how everything for me was just so unexpected. I never expected to work in the World Trade Center. I never expected the World Trade Center to be attacked and come down the way it is. And I don't know, I never expected to be 20 years after the 9/11 attacks. But you know, my consummate wish is that no one has to experience the attacks that we all experience, that the world can somehow, some way be the kind of place that, you know, brings about care and concern and help, and a willingness for people just to live and let live. And if our children, grandchildren can all have that better world, that would be my greatest wish.
Absolutely, and that's a really great message, Peter. Just before we wrap up, I just want to kind of go back to what Cathy mentioned. So, you know, talking about how unbelievable the story of 9/11 is, you know, this is why what we do here is so important, and why, you know, you all sharing your stories is so important, because, you know, it, for the generation that was not born or just too young to remember, you know, it does seem like it was, you know, it seems unbelievable. I mean, I remember watching it on TV as a kid. I was in like seventh grade, sixth, seventh grade. And like when we turned the TV on, I'm like, is this a movie playing? So like even then, it didn't seem real to me. And, you know, a lot of people, you know, I think that's probably why you have things like conspiracy theorists, because it's just such an unbelievable event that it's easy to manipulate it and, you know, do what those kind of people do with it. So it's important to have people who experienced it personally sharing their personal stories, so people really understand and can put a face to, you know, a face to 9/11, and not just have it be something that's relegated to a history book and, you know, pictures and videos on YouTube. So, you know, doing this is really important. And I just want to thank all three of you for sharing your stories, you know, and sharing your reflections, especially in this, you know, year of the 20th anniversary, because, you know, with everything going on, you know, we've dealt with a pandemic for, you know, over a year and a half now, and, you know, still going, but, you know, getting a little better. But, you know, with all these different things and distractions, you know, it's easy to forget that this happened. And, you know, I've heard personally people say, you know, it's, you know, you have to move on, you know, that was 20 years ago. It's like, but people are still, you know, dealing with this to this very day. Like Bob, there are people who are literally ill from being at ground zero. There are people who are being newly diagnosed with things 20 years later. You know, the number of people who have died due to 9/11 related illness has surpassed the people who died on 9/11. So this is something that's an ongoing issue. And it's important that we continue to remember those that we lost that day, those that we've lost since, you know, and support those who are still with us. Because I mean, if it's not a physical toll that it's taken, there's also the mental toll. You know, mental health is really important. There are a lot of people who have PTSD because of what happened. And, you know, it's really, as just a community, as a society, it's really our responsibility to support and, you know, not, you know, have this message of, oh, well, that was 20 years ago, get over it. Like if you
Right.
lost a loved one, and 10 years later, it's nobody's like, how would you feel if somebody just said, oh, just get over it? Like that's, you know, that's not the right mentality to have or reaction to have. So this is really, really important. And I hope that everybody watching this really gets a lot out of this, because this is an important history. You know, you're literally watching living history by watching this video. So we hope that you get a lot out of it. And please share the stories, share this video, share these stories with your friends and your family, because the more people that know about this and understand this at this deep level, will have a greater appreciation for it, and hopefully will then, turn and support the community, because that's really important as we continue to move forward. So with that, we are going to wrap up this program. As this will be on YouTube as well as some of our other channels, if you do have any questions for Cathy, Bob, or Peter, please feel free to add them to the comment section. Thank you all once again. It's just an honor and a privilege to being in your presence. And we will see you on the next program, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.